I'm coming. I don't know if I'm gonna borrow Santa's sleigh or what, but I am not being withheld from Arrowhead tomorrow.
Well, we just make sure that
We'll see.
we'll just make sure the employees can get to wherever they're supposed to go to.
I know, right? We might be pouring our own wine. Jaylene's concentrating on something, you can tell.
Hi, Destiny.
Hi.
Is
Hi,
it snowing?
Oh, are you in
Is it snowing in
Florida?
Big Bear or is it raining?
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to manifest summer.
All right. Good morning.
Either that or you took off on us to Hawaii.
I know.
It's because once you're here, you're gonna stay and work. Like if you were just at home,
Exactly.
you just go about your life.
It is true.
Who's on there?
Let's see. We have Lori, we have Monica, we have Jim, we have Destiny. That's all I can see.
Andrea.
Ken and Lori are here. Ken Simon is on there.
Okay. We have our little gallery.
Well, the topic that I had sort of proposed today was, and we started this, I don't know, another time when I was leading this, was managing expectations in real estate. And there's so many different expectations to manage. I don't feel like we got very far last time, but I feel like there was some good content coming out. And is that something worthwhile to continue pursuing, or is there something else, some other topic or interest that you guys want to mastermind today?
Yeah. So like, I just recently had a thing where I repeated over and over again expectations that were ignored.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, it's like furnishings, our favorite subject. I mean, I repeatedly told them that these items are not furniture.
This was a buyer?
Yeah.
Okay.
These items are not furniture. I must have said 4 or 5 times. And they were still pissed when the TV wasn't there and the dishes weren't there.
That's why you have to write an inventory.
Yeah, get started on that particular things.
What do you do for inventory, Steve? Like, how do you write an inventory? What does it look like?
An inventory of what's going to be made, not an inventory that's not going to be.
So I will do the, inventory that's going to be taken,
Right,
because sometimes that list is so much smaller than.
it's easier. I didn't say it wasn't easier,
Yeah.
but it causes more problems.
Exactly
Because
right.
then they go back after you close and they have pull up a picture from your listing and they go, what about that piece of whatever that's in the corner?
Yep.
And then, like Vicky said, the problem is the word furnishings is vague. Some people think electronics and decor are furniture. Some people think artwork. Some people think tools in the garage are furniture. Some people, so you have to clarify it, and it's difficult. We don't make it hard. When we say kitchen, if we're not sure that every piece in the kitchen, we'll say select cookware will remain.
Oh, I like
Okay.
that phrase.
Select decor will remain, but big stuff, we go a couch, 2 chairs, a TV, DVD player, whatever it is, anything that you can easily put on a piece of paper, and then just the rest of it, if it's going to be questionable, either don't put it on the list at all, or say that it's select, so that the seller can still take their air fryer that they want in the kitchen, but they can leave the rest of the cookware or whatever. Right?
Don't you have where the sellers provide the list? Items that are being removed or items that are staying?
The seller should, yes, they should be providing a list. But and so this is another question. So this is the thing that happened with this deal.
Well, let's go back to that. Let's finish that, because I think
Well, 'cause
there's a
this is
lot of pain
still-
that's caused by that. The whole furnishings idea and discussions over what, you know, who's taking what.
Right,
So
but-
on my team, we used to have, you know, we have a team meeting every week and we do lessons and successes. And almost every week for years, somebody's lesson was related to furnishings, like, oh, a deal that was gonna blow up because of this or that. So we're like, okay, here's a pain point for us. So how do we solve this so that we never have to deal with this pain again? So, you know, it's a little time consuming, but we literally go through every single room. We walk in to the entry and we look around and we go, we start with the wall to the left and we go clockwise around the room. And then we go ceiling floor and we write down everything that's in the room and we describe it. Picture of, you know, reindeer on the wall,
Hilton.
chandelier in the ceiling. And then we create a list literally by room. And so it's listed by room. So there's no confusion over what we're talking. And then we send that to our seller. If the seller can't make it up to get the list themselves
I don't want.
of things that are in the house that are really important to them that they forgot were in the house, that they're gonna later take and say, oh, well, of course I'm not leaving that family heirloom. You know, the old Civil War gun above the fireplace. I forgot that was there, but that, you know, that was my great grandfather. So if you do that, and then we write, we send it to our seller and we say, check the things that you're gonna leave and tell us what you're taking. So then we give a list that's inventory that has all the inclusions and the exclusions, so they can see what's gonna be missing from when they saw the house.
So what did you do that?
So it's
for
just
dishes too?
super clarity. No, so like dishes or any, we say nothing in closets or drawers, or nothing is concealed in a closet or a drawer or a cabinet is coming with it. But then we usually get clarity on, is it okay if we leave that stuff? Like, do you want it if we're willing to leave it? And then, you know, anything that we leave inside a cabinet or a drawer or a closet is bonus for them.
And so as the buyer's agent, if you're not getting that inventory list that you asked for repeatedly, can you go into the house as a buyer's agent and do an inventory?
Sure, we often do it. The seller's not getting it to us. Yeah. I mean, you need to get clarity one way or
Yeah.
another. So if the agent's not doing their job, I would say, yeah, go do the job for them.
Kind of hard. This one was basically rented all the time.
Yeah.
So it was hard to even get in for inspections. It was that agent, I really just wanted to make a complaint on it. But the other question, if you've repeatedly asked for the inventory list and you have the signed document saying you need to have an inventory list, can you do a notice to perform on the inventory list?
In the RPA, how did you specifically ask for that? What does the
Yeah,
RPA say?
an addendum.
It was on the furnishings addendum.
And how did you write that? What did it say?
Things to be included, no additional monetary value, blah, 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 inventory list to be provided within 7 days.
Okay, now here's a good question that I actually have been wanting to mastermind. So when you do that, is that part of the RPA or is it a separate agreement between buyer and seller?
Separate agreement between buyer and seller.
So then
Unless
would-
it's a cash deal.
not really be enforceable and not really your job probably. I don't know. That would be a
Well,
good
see, that's
question
kind
maybe
of
for,
tricky. I mean, I
yeah.
did have a conversation with Kelly. And yeah, so it was like kind of tricky. You know, but it just,
Yeah, that's a good question. If it's, I know a lot of us do it like that, and maybe Jim might have an idea for us or one of you guys.
I do an addendum, which I put on the addendum as a non-loan addendum because the lender and escrow do not want to see it. So you make sure that you do not list it as a 1, a 2, or a 3.
Right.
So I put non-lending addendum, NLA on it.
but that's not the question though.
We do something similar. We put, separate agreement between buyer and seller. We call it furnishings.
Right.
Can't you guys use photos now with, cell phones and technology? No phones are, pictures with description? Is that possible?
You mean as an
Wouldn't
inventory?
make it into an escrow instruction. It would be like a weird side document.
Right.
Monica, you disagree? Tell me.
Disagree, you don't want it. Escrow doesn't want to know anything about the furnishings because you're going to say that they come with no warranty or value.
I'm just saying as far as putting together a list, because I think the contention right now is the list, whether it
Yes.
goes to escrow or not. I think if you put together a package of, photos and description, then there's no question as to what they're talking about. Because I think, is that the confusion of, whether this thing right here in the room in the corner is a table or not? Because I've done lists before where the seller sends it to me and I don't even know what they're talking about half the time on the list.
Can we go, Vicky, can you restate the question that you have in
Getting a
your
list-
mind from what Will's saying?
Yeah, I think it's getting the list in general and how to force that upon like the agent, whether it's whatever site it's on.
Yeah.
To present to you if they're not within the specified time that you put on the addendum, right? So.
Well,
like,
and then
if
there's the, go
it's
ahead.
8 days to get the list, how can we enforce that if it's on just an addendum, right? So like, that's what we're trying to get at,
Yeah.
is how.
And then you have, like, there can be a coffee table, but it's not the coffee table from when I decided to write an offer. I've seen that, like, oh yeah, there was a coffee table here, but we wanted that one, so we just put another one there, and that causes problems too, right? So that needs to be part of
Correct.
identifying this list. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's getting
but-
that list in general, Jim, is what we're trying to get at is, like, how do we get that agent is not doing it?
So, and repeatedly, we need the list, we need the list. We've already told you in the email, these 3 items are staying or are going and everything else is staying. Well, no. Like a lot of stuff went, not just the 3 items in the email stating, or no, it was on the counter offer. These
Well,
3
Will
items.
has a very meticulous process. What's wrong with Will's process?
It's time consuming. That's the only thing wrong with it. It's very, this coffee table and this room. And I think when you're detail oriented and you make that list, then the other agent takes it much more seriously. Like, oh, they care about these furnishings because they are being very specific. You know what I mean? Like, it becomes more of like, hey, it's my job to figure this out than, hey, you just figure it out yourselves. Like, it is our job because I've seen deals blow up over stupid stuff. Like, I've literally seen deals blow up because somebody wasn't going to leave some item that probably worth a couple $100, but they both just start butting heads, and it's like the buyer says, "We'll walk away over this."
Even with
So,
this,
but
even with this.
well, but then there's a list, and it's
What we do
being
is,
tied, and it has things that are included and excluded. There,
Your guys' audio is starting to go. We
There's
can't hear
nothing
you.
they can do about it. We just gotta wait for the internet to get better. Go ahead, guys.
doc and a PDF. We tell them, hey, you can either cross out the things on the list on the PDF or use the Word doc and revise it and look it over really good before you send it back, because then we'll send it to you for signatures and we'll give it to the buyer for his signature. But like Lorena's just closing a deal right now over on Highland, which they said was, well, we're taking the bear that they signed on the inventory, because our son wants it.
Yeah, and that's.
And
Yeah,
then-
they don't, I had
And then Lorena was worried about that, so then she goes to the house to verify the inventory. And do a video walkthrough with the buyer, because they wanted to know what was still there and make sure that the bear was either there or it wasn't. And the bear was there, but now the end table that they said was going to be there is missing.
it's an issue.
So it's always been an issue. And it's back to what Will's point is, though, is setting expectation. So how many times in that scenario have we said, when we return the documents to the listing agent as a buyer's agent, here's the signed contract, please send over that inventory. I don't want us to go past that time period, and you just got to keep on them and on them. If you wait till the 7th day when it was due and they're not able to come up the hill, then you're gonna be waiting another week or more. And if I don't get it usually within a few days, I'll just go write one myself have my buyer signed it.
But there was people living in the house. How do I
Yeah,
get
that makes it
access?
hard. Yeah, and
Okay.
I had a
So it was
rental,
just a
that little
mess.
one that you tried to sell that I sold on Talmadge.
Mhm.
Well, they rented it till the last day before the closing.
I know,
And then the lady said, well, I didn't want furniture.
I know.
She never mentioned the furniture, but it was in the MLS. It said it was coming furnished. And so then I'm like, well, so I gotta hire somebody to remove all the furniture?
No, because you have the sheet that says furnishing. I just had the same issue. I presented her with the sheet. I said, I'm sorry. We mark it if it comes furnished.
Right, but the MLS is not an inventory.
Well,
Like,
she did-
for example, I got bitten on that
It
before.
worked for you.
Of some sort.
I tried that one, fully furnished.
Well,
We have
versus
more
some people just
control.
a bed and a coffee table.
Isn't that sort of thing? But when you're representing buyers, that's where you get into hiccups, because you don't have the control that you have when you're representing the seller.
Well, maybe put it on that separate contract, the, whatever you're gonna use, furnishings, non-lender. I have machines and we check other, we say separate agreement, right?
Right.
But sometimes we try to tie that, I know it doesn't have as much teeth, but we'll tie that together with the contract and say this contract is separate, but it's contingent upon the close of escrow on the house. And it's, you know, because what if you sign, how many times this happened? You get a big house on the lake. And we're buying the furniture for $40,000 outside of escrow. Well, the last thing you want to happen is you get to, they remove the contingencies and they say, we decided we didn't want the furniture.
Uh-huh.
And the seller's like, well, I wouldn't have sold the house. That 40,000 was part of what I wanted when I sold the house. So you have to find a way to tie it together. It's kind of like the discussion I had last week about that lot. It was next to the house that I sold. It became a big problem because the guy backed out of the house and then tried to buy the lot for a reduced price that he had already negotiated by
So
buying
do you
both
put
at the
that
same
in the
time.
addendum? That it's-
Yeah, I will tie it in sometimes. And then like Lori said, I think.
What language would you use to tie it in? Like if the sale goes through, then the furnishings will be purchased or?
No, they're contingent on each other. The purchase of the home and the purchase of the furniture are contingent upon one another. And if it's a dollar amount that you're paying, then it can go to escrow. Then it can go to lenders. It can cause problems, but it can go to them. You know, there's nothing that says you can't buy the furniture at a house. A lender can't tell you can't buy the guy's furniture as a separate agreement.
As long as what they're buying the house for.
The reason that we do it, Jim, the way we do it up here and the way Monica was talking about is because so many homes are sold with a house full of furnishings, right? And here's what happens is the appraiser looks at the MLS and says, oh, this house is being sold furnished. And then the appraiser walks in and goes, wow, these are really nice furnishings. And the appraiser all of a sudden becomes a furniture salesman and assigns a value to the furnishings. Well, the lender's not going to lend on real property, right? So the lender reduces the appraisal by their perceived value of the furnishings in the house.
Yeah.
And so that's the way we do it, where we put it on a separate contract so that it doesn't screw up the appraisal, basically. And
Because
like-
when we used to give them away, or sometimes we still obviously give away furniture with the deal. Sometimes if a lender knows about it, they'll come in and they'll go, well, how much value are you assigned to the couch?
Yeah.
How much are you assigned to TV? And they go right down the list.
So
Yeah,
that
it
makes
becomes a-
total sense that you want to separate it. But then as soon as you separate it, it becomes kind of less enforceable.
right, so that's
And
what.
the issue.
That's the issue. So, I like Steve's idea of tying them together with some specific language, where one is contingent upon the other, even though it's a
Can-
separate agreement.
Can we
Contingent
put
on-
it on the non-lending addendum, basically that states X, Y, and Z, that the furnishings are part of the contract, and if furnishings are missing, then makes the purchase contract null and void?
Or maybe just
Yeah.
use the word contingent.
Mhm.
And if you send that email in the beginnings about the furnishings and say, just, I want to let you know, we're not going to be removing contingencies until I get that inventory back, and I don't want the inventory during our transaction. I mean, it's the setting expectation thing that Will's talking about here, where you tell everybody up front what's gonna happen if this doesn't happen, right? And I know that it doesn't always work. It's never perfect. But if you say, we won't be removing our contingencies till we get that inventory back, so be sure you get that over to us. You know,
Yeah, earlier the better.
They can turn around and give you a notice to perform for not removing your contingency.
sure.
So, you know,
Can we look at this from the seller side? What could you do as a listing agent to make to solve the problem? Like, how could we act as a listing agent in this? And then,
I would go in the room and go like what, I think like what Will stated is go in with time consuming, but I've done it in the past with larger homes where we've gone in with Post-it notes and saying, you know, hallway item 1, 2, 3, and write it all down, take pictures, go to the living room, the dining room, everything. And we wrote it all down and had Mr. Seller cross off what was staying and what, you know, what he was taking. And then we put it on separate documents. So when we sent it over to the prospective buyer's agent, they knew exactly what was staying and what was going. There was photos and everything attached.
what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the only way we've been able to solve it over the years. And it still isn't 100% perfect, but it solves 99% of the problems. If you just are real clear that the furnishings are an important part of the deal, and if you take the time to make the list, if the other agent isn't going to do it. I mean, there's a lot of times that we end up doing the other agent's job because we're here to serve our client and create a raving fan out of our client. And we're not going to let the other agent not doing their job damage our service to our client. So if we have to do the other agent's job, we will do that. And that's just one of the many areas where we will do the other agent's job. If we're on the buyer side of it and we're not getting what we need, we will figure out how to get what we need.
It sounds
I
like
think-
an Avid would work if you had like a furniture Avid.
You know what Melissa does, Melissa Evans Gray, I don't know if she's on here, but she'll go through and she'll dictate it on her phone. She'll just walk through the room and she'll be like, okay, entryway, you know, cabinet, and blah, 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 you know, carpet, throw rug on the floor, antler chandelier on the ceiling, next room, you know, bedroom, master bedroom. And then she just goes, like I said, just go, have a systematic way to do it and do it by room. And it's very clear when it's written down by room, what item you're talking about.
I don't know if that's a binding though, as far as a contract goes. And also, when you're specifying your items, do you put that on your listing agreement? I mean, it's going to be a long list, or you just do an addendum like Monica said.
I don't know who was talking about.
It's Jen
That was
Condra.
Jen.
It's binding if it's an inventory list. So I label it inventory and then I label the different rooms in the house. It's sort of like, you know, an Avid almost. If you're going to go do an Avid anyway, you may as well do the inventory while you're doing the Avid. And
Right.
it takes an hour
And
even
then
with a
have the
big.
client sign it.
Well, I'm saying the video that you're saying when you go through the house and do a recording, I don't know that that is binding.
Oh, no. Then you have to translate that.
Text, voice to text.
She
so you
she
can copy
uses
and paste.
she uses the recording to create her list when she gets back to the office.
Got you.
Yeah, sorry. That's not what they're, yeah, that was just to
That's like
just to walk through the house quickly.
Yeah, that's make it easier.
Anything else about furnishings or inventory lists or furnishings agreements or addendums? I like Steve's idea. I'm gonna start incorporating that where we tie it together and make it contingent. I don't think I'll put the RPA is contingent on the furnishing, but just the furnishings addendum is contingent upon,
Yeah, you can't put it on the RPA.
right, you can't put it on the
Lender wants to
RPA.
see it.
Defeats the purpose, yeah.
Right.
Can you tie it into the request for repairs somehow?
On the separate agreement, like Vicky said, I mean, if they decide not to live up to it, you still got a problem.
Yeah, because if they had given us what we wanted, we wouldn't have had it all.
But if it's being purchased for a dollar amount, 10,000, 15,000 or
Then
something,
you can.
I'd put it on you know, because I've been
Yeah.
bid,
If
I
it's not
put it on
wrapped
the
into the book,
contract, and I would say, this sale is contingent upon the furnishings purchased for $15,000 outside of escrow.
Well, if you did your inventory list, could you reference it on the request for repairs?
as long as you're not trying to borrow the money. to
Oh, you're
buy
not
the
borrowing the money, yeah, separate money.
Okay,
Yeah.
Jim is
Right.
trying to say something.
Jim is asking,
What size is it?
If you did your inventory list and that existed, could you then reference that list on the request for repairs? So it
I don't
ties
think-
it in.
I don't think you can because the lender can see that because a lot of times
Yeah,
they want to make sure that the repairs are done, especially if it has anything to do with termite.
yeah, yeah. All right. Bad idea.
Idea,
I,
that's good.
I think that maybe there's a somehow that we do an addendum that predicates that everything and have both buyer and seller sign it. And the agents sign it, saying that this document pertains to the purchase contract in reference to the furnishings or whatever it is that, you know, the sellers and buyers are requesting from each other.
That's the same that you can get if you have an inventory list.
Some agents attach their inventory list to the MLS.
How for?
I would suggest, if you don't want to create lender problems as a listing agent, to not put furnished in the MLS. I would suggest always using furnishings negotiable. And that way, when the appraiser is reading it, they don't know if the furnishings are part of the agreement. And then if the agreement doesn't specific that they see, doesn't have furnishings on it, they assume that the furnishings are not included. And that's not going to screw up your appraisal. So that's the way we do it. So even if our seller says, I want to sell it with the furnishings, we say furnishings negotiable. We usually talk to the seller. We come up with a price that they'll be happy to accept that includes the furnishings. And then we use the furnishings to keep the offer price up. So if somebody comes in low and we say, oh, well, you want the furnishings, you're going to need to come up to here. So we use it as a negotiating item. It doesn't screw up the appraisal, and that's the way we do it.
And do you put that in the MLS in the private remarks then, Will?
No, we don't put it in the
No.
MLS anywhere.
No.
We put furnishings negotiable, and then when the agent writes the offer or asks us about it, often they'll have furnishings on the offer and we have them rewrite it with it on a separate addendum.
Right.
We kind of guide them in how to write it.
Right.
Depending on what they're looking to do. But back to something Monica said, another area that we had a big pain point was always when there was repairs that were being requested and being performed. So our preference on our team is strongly to get credits versus having repair work done unless it is lender required, like termite or, you know, for some sort of like government loan. So
I agree.
always ask for a credit because it's in the seller's best interest to do it the cheapest, fastest, down and dirtiest way, the work. It's in the buyer's best interest to do it the best possible way. So who do you want, you know, hiring someone to do that work or managing or organizing that work? You want the person who's going to own the house doing that, which is the buyer. Or you want, if there's going to be a contractor paid to do the work, you want that contractor liable to the person that hired them. So for any kind of warranties or anything like that. So to me, it's always made way more sense to get a credit. So when you figure out what work is going to, you know, should be done or repairs, you know, the buyer and seller are going to agree, I would always recommend negotiating a credit versus having the work done, because then it turns us into like a home inspector where we have to go back and see if the work was done, if it was done properly. Now it's on us to like be able to inspect work and decide if it was done, you know,
Holly has a.
to a manner.
Idea. And I just brought up something else that I have on that too. But on the addendum, as a separate agreement between buyer and seller, the furnishings addendum. What about adding verbiage about L4, review of seller documents? To be included in RPA L4, 3L4.
Well, that's an idea for how to tie it in together. Yeah.
Kind of comes in the,
Yeah.
into the.
So it's not like offensive or, I mean, it seems like if you put that it was, if the purchase is contingent on the furnishings, as a seller, I feel like that would be kind of like I don't know. This just seems less offensive.
That's a thought. Yeah,
And then
that's a good
it's,
thought.
then it is part of the
Yeah.
contract.
That's an idea.
Can you
Yeah, we're-
repeat what Holly just said, Will? Cause she's
Yeah,
so
like-
soft.
Yeah, so L4 on the contract is review of seller's documents. If you put subject to, how would you write?
Included.
Included in L4 on the RPA or subject to L4,
Then it would be included in the contract.
then it would give the buyer the right
The
to,
contingency period.
yeah.
That's under contingencies
Great, thank you.
review. But, the other thing you were just saying, I just had a fun one where we got a request for a credit of $3,000 and my seller came back and said, oh, well, let's just raise the price by 5,000 then. And I was like, wait a minute. That was really interesting. And then,
Raise the price after you.
After
were
you
at
agreed on the
negotiation,
price,
or-
yes.
yeah, like he was just a little clueless about the whole thing. So I guess,
No, he's not giving you a credit. You gotta give him one.
yeah. Yeah. And so I had to explain to him that that's not really how it works. You can say no to the credit.
He didn't lower the price and he just misspoke.
No,
Maybe
he
he meant-
wanted them to increase the purchase price
And
to
then you
cover
would
what
back.
they were asking.
So they can basically lend.
Plus
on it.
2,000.
And then they get another 2,000
They
because we
wanted
did
3,000.
that.
He wants to raise the price by 5 then.
Yeah, it's
So I had
perfect.
That's the
to, you know,
expectation.
I did not get that.
Well,
that's what
You
really
guys,
don't-
that's a great example of why I think Will picked this topic anyways, which is setting expectations. And what that means to me is massive communication very early on all the points that you know as an agent, an experienced agent, are going to come up. Not waiting for it to happen and then explaining it, but being organized enough to say, okay, here we go. Now we need to take 20 minutes and go over these things that are going to happen in the next 30 days.
Yeah, that's it.
No, and when I did tell him, you know, this is what's gonna happen. They have these contingencies and these days to do it and blah, blah, blah. But I didn't go into, you know, I guess. That just threw me for a loop. That's something that I've never had to explain to somebody, you know? And then he came back and said, well, I thought we had a deal. And I said, well, we do have a deal, but they have right to do their inspections, and then most buyers do come back with a request for repairs or a request for a credit. So we just deal with it at that time. We're still in negotiations during the contingency period. So,
Yeah.
you know, I had.
The way I preempt that and set the expectation is whether I'm working with a buyer or seller, is I think of it as a series of hurdles to get over. And I tell them what the hurdles are that are coming up, and I tell them what could go wrong and, you know, what we might have to deal with. And usually, you know, people are happy when their expectations are met. So an expectation is a picture about what's going to happen or what some product or service is going to be like, right? That they hold in their head. So before we can exceed their expectations and turn them into a raving fan, we need to know what picture do they hold in their head and how do we need to modify that picture so that we can meet or exceed it. So part of setting expectations is if their expectation is here, but that's not realistic, we need to get them below realistic so that when realistic happens, they're happy, right? So if you want to create a raving fan, you exceed their expectations.
Okay.
You can do that by just being the most amazing real estate agent in the world in every area. But if their expectations are unrealistic, you must lower their expectation before you can exceed it, right? Because there's some people that just have a high expectation. So in this example, there's a hurdle coming up. Okay, look, Mr. Seller, great, we got the contract signed, we're in escrow. The next hurdle is they're going to be doing some inspection, and they're likely to ask us to fix some things, you know, or take care of some things that come up in their inspections. And here's what we can do.
You know your house, and you know there are things that might come up. I don't know, but you do. So if they do come up, then you should, you know,
Right.
be ready for that.
So when do I start setting an expectation? On the listing appointment. I will literally, I have a list of questions that's a mile long. And one of the questions is, are there any major disclosures about the house? And they'll say no. And then I say, have you ever had any water intrusion? Have you had any disputes with your neighbors? Like I literally start listing verbally the things, because what I want to do during the listing presentation is usually devalue their house in their mind. Their house is always worth, they're the seller, their house is always worth up here in the clouds, right? But realistic value is here. So a great way to devalue their house in their mind so that you can list it at a price that's going to cause it to sell is remind them that their house is not perfect. How do you remind them? You ask them questions. You say, have you ever had water intrusion? Have you ever had a dispute with the neighbors? Have you ever had an insurance claim? Have you ever, that earthquake in '92, did your chimney fall down? Do you have any foundation cracks that you're aware of? And it reminds them that their little perfect baby is not perfect, right? And now it's going to help you get your price for the listing. And it's also going to make that conversation a lot easier when they do the home inspection and they start discovering these things. Oh, remember you told me you had that water intrusion, and well, it turns out that there's still mold in the wall. And unfortunately, that's a real major health. It's something we're going to have to take, we're going to have to get it professionally remediated, because nobody's going to want to buy that. And now that it's been discovered, we can't sell it to anybody until we take care of it. So let's take care of it right. Even if you continue to live here and decide not to sell it, you really shouldn't live here without mold in the wall. So, let's get it taken care of. Let's do it right. But that conversation, that expectation is set way back before you even list the house. And then it makes your conversation later much easier, because you've already had the conversation. You already discovered the things that they're going to come up on the inspection.
Yeah, no, this one was unique because I did, I always do have the conversation. But yeah, that was really.
Will, can we get that list that you have of the questions, your crystal ball questionnaire for the sellers? That would be great to have.
I don't know. It's a little bit proprietary, and Curtis might not let me share it with you.
Come on.
It's a big part of our listing presentation. I mean,
Yeah, that's a totally fair answer, Jen. I mean,
Okay.
we have listing presentations, but the way each agent or team makes them unique, that's what makes them unique.
Okay.
Don't worry,
and
we'll make
this
sure
is-
you have everything you need to get your next listing.
Okay, I can't look into your crystal ball
Right.
then, huh?
Oops, uh-oh.
I might send me an email separately, and let me look it over and consider it.
Thank you, Will.
Jen, what we can do is when we have our team meetings, we can go over these items. And
Okay.
I can tell you the questions that I ask in a listing agreement.
Awesome.
Yay, Monica has a crystal ball.
No, no one has a crystal ball.
And when I walk through a house with the seller, prior to sitting down at hopefully like the kitchen table or something to talk to them about this presentation.
Speak up so they can hear you on TV.
When I walk through a house and I'm working on a listing with the seller, and we sit down after we're done at the kitchen table usually, and I start with my listing questions or presentation. While I'm walking through the house, I see things, but I don't ask while we're there. I ask after I sit down. And I go, so that stain in the master bedroom on the wall up in the corner, is that a water stain? You know what happened there, right? And then, so when's the last time you did the grout in the shower? I noticed the grout's falling out in the shower in there. Or maybe it might be, wow, the grout really looks great, or the tile in the shower looks like you replaced that. Was that a remodel that you did, or did you upgrade the tile shower? It's being observant. And so that's why it's different at every house, because every house is different. If you walk out in the backyard and the slope of the land goes like this, and you can see staining on the outside of the wall, don't you want to ask them, have you ever had any problem, with water coming in the back door? Or is this just something from the previous owner? Or what if the remedy looks like you had an issue here, right? So without making fun of the house, which is not what we're doing, we're just trying to identify problems that might come up in the future if we're going to try to sell your home, right? So you kind of help dig out some information, and sometimes it's people that are not honest But a lot of times it's people just don't remember.
Right.
They don't remember everything they've done on their house or what they've worked on. I mean, often we'll send them the thing, we use the program called Glide to do disclosures often. And it asks a lot of questions to get you to answer the question correctly. But even after they do that whole program, I can't tell you how many times you get it back from the seller and it says nothing ever happened here. You know, it's like it must be a brand new house. Nobody's ever done anything here. And so you look at that and you go, wait a minute. I remember when I sold you that house 10 years ago. I remember what the kitchen looked like. It doesn't look like that anymore. So, you know, sometimes we have to do a little bit of the prodding and getting them to respond with the right information. And then we also want to let them know that disclosure is great because you know what, when you disclose something, you remove liability. And this is the same reason why we want to negotiate credits instead of repairs. If a seller hasn't taken care of his house the whole time he owned it, why are you going to want him to make the repairs on the house that this has never taken care of correctly? We want the money, and then you can go hire your contractor. Your contractor will be responsible to you because you're the one that hired him with the money that you negotiated from the seller.
Whether you
Right.
get it fixed or not.
And if you're the seller, you give them the money, then it's not on your table anymore. If the guy doesn't fit the GFCI correctly and somebody shocks themselves, that's their electrician, not you, right? So I think everybody knows all that stuff, but really that's what you want to do is that's part of setting expectation, right? Here's how we're going to handle it when we get to that stage of they're going to make a request. And like you say, a lot of times it's at the listing appointment, you know. And if you can tell that story correctly, they go, wow, you know, these people really know how the transaction is going to go. They've got a lot of transactional experience, right? Experience is what sets us apart. And you know, that's why you don't say, I think, you say, my experience tells me that this is going to be an issue. So it's not that I'm trying to pick your house apart. I'm just trying to tell you what my experience tells me that this could come up as an issue, right?
Yep, I just had that come up where I sold a house. It was my buyer that purchased a home. And during the transaction, we got an additional 30,000 off the house plus 14,000 towards his closing costs for instead of repairs. He calls me up several months ago, wants to sell his house. I go over there and he didn't do any of the things that he got the monies for and tells me, oh, my house is worth this much now. And I said, well, what about the heater? What about the siding that had to come down where all the acorns are in? What about the 2 cracked windows? He goes, that's not your problem or concern. I said, yes, it is. And I said, I'm walking away from the listing. Because I already knew what was going to happen. Now I've watched it and it's fallen out of escrow 3 times because he's not being honest.
Right, but, and is this Monica?
Yes.
Yes.
So Monica, and I'm not trying to nitpick what you're saying, but one way to say that to him is, so you're asking another question, right? So you're going to be okay with it, Bill, a year from now when the buyer comes back and says you didn't disclose these things and they want to take you to court. Because that's not where I want to end up in court. I want you to be happy with the trunk full of cash and down the road, right? And so
Correct.
we want to disclose everything we have issues with here, because if we don't, you're just opening yourself up to liability. And
Correct.
you know, is a state where people get sued quite frequently, and I don't want you or I to be one of them. You know, so you don't have to get too detailed with it, but you really want to get them to disclose things correctly. I mean,
And that's what I presented to him. I said, you know, you have the disclosure from from when we purchased it. And, you know, now you're going to have to disclose the same items, you know, plus the additional ones that we did in your contract. And he's like, no, I don't. And I said, well, that's your responsibility as the seller. And it's my responsibility as the agent to disclose everything that was not done correctly. And I said, I can't do that. I said, my license is my livelihood. And my fiduciary responsibility too is also to be honest. And I said, I have to walk away from this.
Yeah, well, I mean, as an agent, the other way around it is you can write all that stuff on your Avid if it's visual.
Mhm.
It's got a cracked window, you know, the heater, whatever they described in the last time when you sold it last time, you can still bring up those points, but my point is to tell them, look, we need to disclose correctly, and honestly, I think buyers react better to over disclosure than they do to under disclosure.
Yeah.
Well, they only sue when they have an unpleasant surprise.
Right, and they don't only sue for that, you know, I got a call yesterday and I don't even know, remember who, I often get calls, people think they're calling the office. They call my phone. So this was a call yesterday about somebody who bought a house in the bigger area and they were disappointed because the listing agent had not made the seller disclose all the things correctly that were wrong with the house, right? It's the same story we're listening to right now, what we're talking about. And first of all, I mean, how does a listing agent always know? They don't. I mean, especially if they haven't sold a house before, right? But the biggest thing is this type of market, where you buy a house for 600,000 and next year it might be worth 7, but it might be worth 5. If the market starts going down in value at that rate to where a year from now people are looking at a substantial loss in market value, they start looking for reasons to go back to the seller and you as the agent. And I've told this story before, but I remember Tyler Wood got a client on that house that's for sale right now next to the one that Mike Dolan has on East Lake, the one to the left of it. They were going to sue the seller because they did not disclose that the pigeons wrapped on the back deck.
Oh, that's right.
Oh,
Yes.
You know, I mean, it sticks in my mind, but what I'm saying is they'll go after you for anything because they're mad because they've lost value
Yes.
and the market shifted. Well, the seller isn't responsible for market shifts and neither are we, but that's why we have certain forms that protect us a little bit. But the point is, we got to find all the reasons that they might do that ahead of time if we can and disclose correctly. And I think over disclosure is better than under disclosure. Nobody believes it when you say nothing's wrong.
Let me add something to that, like a public service announcement. So all of we have E&O coverage, right? So you guys are covered up to $2 million for any of these things, which is good news. But Steve's right. People can sue for pigeon crap. You can sue, you can claim anything and there's an attorney that will represent you. And so what that does is that activates an E&O claim, right? It kicks in our insurance coverage, but we have a deductible. And for the last 12 years, those deductibles have been between like $7,500 and $10,000. When we went to go repurchase our E&O insurance, every single E&O company has jacked up their deductible to $15,000. So if you have a claim, that's we pay half and you pay half, right? Or it goes with your split, which would be you pay more and we pay less. But I mean, $7,500, just keep that dollar amount up to, 15,000 in your head when you're in that moment of like, oh, I really should disclose this more. Like, just the more you can dot the I's and cross the T's, because people are litigious and those deductibles are, so I'm a little long-winded, but the deductibles are going up and it sucks.
And if you get sued and it goes to that level, the E&O company is going to settle even if you're right.
Correct.
Something Steve said a few minutes ago, I wrote down because I thought it was a great script, and that was something to tell to a seller when they're trying to be a little unethical, or they're like, oh, well, this happened, but we don't really need to tell them that, do we? Right? We probably all had sellers like that. I have, where they want you to lie or not disclose something, or they want to get away with not disclosing something. And what Steve just said that I wrote down was when you disclose something, you remove liability for it.
Yeah.
You could have a house that like is just studs and has no electrical and no plumbing and whatever, but it looks like maybe it does. And as long as you disclose that, you could still sell it and they can't come back at you later. So whatever you say that's true about the house, and they read that disclosure and sign off on it, they're agreeing to take the house in as is condition. That's what the purchase contract says, right? So as long as it's disclosed, all the things that are wrong with the house, you can sell any house, no matter how bad it is, right? As long as you disclose it. But if you don't disclose stuff, you want to talk to the seller about the recourse. So here's what happens if you don't tell this buyer about that broken pipe that caused the flood, that caused the mold that you just had remediated. Here's what can happen. The new buyer buys the house, and then your neighbor comes over to meet him and says, oh, wow, you bought that house that had the big flood last year, right? Immediately, slam dunk, in any court of law in the country, that buyer can make you buy your house back and sue you for, distress, damages, their time spent, all their inspections. So like, if you don't disclose something and then they discover that it was a disclosable fact that you knew about, slam dunk, they can force you to buy the house back and pay them reparations. So, you want to talk to the seller like that when they're trying to be, that. So just warn them about what the consequences are of lying and getting caught.
Or what the consequences are of doing your own repairs.
Yeah.
That's just, you might as well just stand there and say, shoot me. If you're not a licensed electrician and you're gonna make the electrical repairs in your house, that's stupid. That's the easiest way I can say it. You either have to hire somebody who can take the recourse if there's an action afterwards. So then you go, well, no, look, here's my receipt. I hired this guy. This is his contractor license number. He did the work. It's his problem, not mine. I don't know that it's always going to be his problem in the end, but the point is, that's how you protect yourself from liability. And what is our job as an agent? To protect our clients. It's our fiduciary duty. So we're trying to protect them. We're also trying to explain how to keep your liability the minimum on action. And that is donate, not donate, you offer a credit, a reasonable credit for the amount that the work that you agree needs to be done to the house and that you're willing to have done and get there. And it's just, it makes it so much better. We don't have, a lot of times people say, I don't want the termite company to do the woodwork. They do crappy work and it doesn't look good when they're done. But that's all the buyer asks for. They want the work done and they want the termite clearance. So we'll do what they ask and you're not going to be looking at it. You're not going to be living here, but at least the work's going to be done and it's done by a license. And if they don't like the way the work's done, they can go back to the termite company. If you do it yourself, and then the stringer breaks and somebody falls down the stairs, they're going to come after, they're going to investigate and find out who put that stringer in and why didn't it hold up. There's too much liability in fixing things, in my opinion. You do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions that's on our list of questions we ask at a listing appointment is, have you sold a home recently? And have you sold one in California? And the reason I'm asking that is because if they haven't, their expectation about the paperwork that's required is not realistic. And so you want to set that expectation right up front at the listing appointment. Look, you haven't sold a home in California in a while, and California, unfortunately, is the most litigious state. So, I'm right here with you, but we're going to have to fill out a stack of paper this high. And I apologize for the amount of paperwork you have to do because you live in California. Like, it's not your fault, but set that expectation. And then later on, they're not going to be griping and complaining and moaning to you about the amount of paperwork you're saying, because you set the expectation about the amount of paperwork. And then it comes back to the liability conversation. Remember when I told you California is the most litigious state? Well, here's what's going to happen if we don't disclose this, people get sued all the time and have to buy their house back and lose lawsuits. So like, these expectations start so early. You start setting all the expectations. Who can think of some other examples of expectations that should be set really, really early? Anything related to a real estate transaction?
I'm having a problem with the cost of a house.
Timing extension.
Timing, extensions, paying attention to contractual dates, what happens if we don't meet these deadlines? Yeah, it's really, I think the hardest thing to explain in real estate correctly and accurately is contingencies and what happens and notices to perform. And, you know, who gets to keep the deposit and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, if you're not really, really fluent on the process and what happens here, what happens if this timeline isn't met, what happens if a notice to perform is set, and how long do I have to respond to that? You should get really clear on that. That's probably the number one thing that we should be able to explain very clearly as a real estate agent, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Here's the
that's,
date,
I mean,
here's all that.
we have to meet our deadlines.
And one thing we don't do very much as agents, or at least I shouldn't say we, I should say I don't do very well as an agent, is read through all the material that we receive from the authority, which is CAR. They just sent us last week a one-page informational sheet on liquidated damages. It's really good. If you haven't seen it, look at it. Just search liquidated damages, CAR, and it's all on one sheet, but explains why there is no non-refundable deposits. Okay, even though sometimes they happen, but really what they're saying is they're never non-refundable. They might take you to court and win if you've given up a deposit. So, but look through all of that stuff. I mean, we get so much information emailed to us. We wake up in the morning and delete half of our inbox before we even read anything, you know, just who's it from and if it's important or not. But CAR sends us a lot of stuff, but I would look at that one, the liquidated damages that just came out last week. We just got some good info on it. And or reminders, I guess some of us know it. I'm not sure I do it all, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, things change constantly, and they update you, and it's nice to just, oops, that's changed, I thought it this way, now it's this. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
So at least-
Well, you're more involved with CAR than I am, so you probably read it more than I do.
Sure. Yeah, I see it, I was like, I should read that, but I put it in my box, my folder, and it's like, there's a lot I should read. But I do go to the meetings, at least when going to those forms meetings and the legal ones, those are really informative. I like those a lot.
So I have a house that just, a new listing, it just went into escrow. And he bought it in 2020, June 2020, did a full complete remodel on the house. His SPQ and TDS are no, all the way.
Oops,
So,
you call back and say, "You told me that this was all we done."
yeah, I mean, literally, it's,
Yeah, well, sometimes what you put in the MLS, I've seen that, where what is in the MLS doesn't align with what's on the SPQ and TDS. You know, fully remodeled, and then the SPQ and TDS, no repairs, nothing has been done about this.
nope, that's
So,
exactly how
yeah.
it is, because I stated in my description that it had been
Because he told you.
recently remodeled. You
Yeah.
know,
I just got disclosures from an out of area listing agent for my buyer. It all said no, but she just told me, and it says in her MLS description about the same thing. The whole house had been remodeled. A dozen things. And it was no on everything, so I sent him back, I said he needs to fix this.
Mhm. Yeah, it's, you have to be due diligent.
Part of the property was painted when you remodeled it, you know. Has any part of the property been painted with it?
Yeah. So you left it.
Yeah. So, yeah, that conversation with it. Excuse me,
Is he in push, you might have to sit down with him and say, hey,
he's gonna be up this weekend to get some things out of the garage, and so.
yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little bit better.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna say something just because it popped into my mind, but when you do have somebody with some batshit crazy perception and they tell you what it is, Like, let's say you're dealing with a buyer and they say, well, we're gonna ask the seller to fix every single thing on this, request for repairs.
The 78-page home inspection.
Something I learned from Bold was you don't use the word but, because it negates their thinking and what they're saying and makes them feel like you're not on their side. You say and, you say, and have you thought about how the seller is going to receive that? And then you go back to Steve's line. In my experience, when we ask for everything, we don't get anything. They just say, forget it. In my experience, you get a better result when you only ask for the health and safety issues that, we could justify, could potentially cause harm to you or somebody else. So like, use the word and instead of but, like, no, but you're an idiot. No, you should.
You're an idiot.
Get the butt out there, man. Just an idiot.
What other expectations do you set really super early on? So that was really good timelines. And then we jumped off on a huge tangent.
Well, I think it's problematic for most of us that, in my case, it's usually buyer's agents because I work with listings more than buyers, but with that email that you're also sending out about the inventories or whatever else, say, just want to remind you that your avid is part of the disclosures. And we need to get that turned in or else
Yes.
we can't sign off on the contingencies.
Avid is almost the
Yeah,
last thing
everyone
that
gets
everybody
that.
turns in.
People never, agents are lazy.
Yeah.
So if you're a buyer's agent or if you're a listing agent, I say get them done within 3 days of the escrow opening. That's my goal, as long as I'm in town. But I'm saying you can set that expectation with the buyer's agent or the listing agent by sending that email and just reminding them that this is the way you do things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, back when I first started, and I try to be very flexible with other agents and be understanding and help get through deals because that really helps keep everybody moving in the right direction. But you got to remember that when there's two agents and a buyer and a seller, somebody's going to be driving the bus.
And I'd be the one.
You'd rather be driving it yourself by setting the expectations up front instead of letting everybody else set the expectations, which may not meet the criteria you need to get the deal done. It's like the lender making that email to the lender right away and saying, hey, just want to introduce myself. I'm the listing agent. We got the offer. These are the contingency periods. This is when they're due. I just want to make sure you noted those on the contract because we are going to be enforcing those. That doesn't always work.
Yeah, but at least it's there. At least
But
you're giving it to them.
It works a lot better than not telling them,
Mhm.
So.
Yeah, when you think about a real estate transaction, how complex it is and how many people are involved. You got a buyer, a seller, a buyer's agent, a listing agent, you've got home inspectors, you got termite inspectors, you got home stagers, you got think of all the people, and that real estate agent is the director of this whole play, right? And for our client to be happy, it has to be totally smooth and they can't feel any hiccups, but we know there's going to be hiccups. And so like Steve was saying, an experienced agent is able to anticipate the next hurdle or the next hiccup and set the expectation for what could happen and how you might deal with that when it happens. And I try to, again, always set the expectation on the low side so that when what's likely to happen happens, it's better than the outcome that I had kind of planted the seed that could happen in their mind. Like, okay, the appraisal is going to happen. What if it comes in low? What are we going to do? Are we going to, here's what the buyer might do if their appraisal comes in low. They might ask us to make up the difference. They might ask us to reduce the price. They might ask us to split the difference with them. And now I've just planted that seed. Oh, dang, the appraiser. And then, the seller is waiting, holding their breath for that appraisal to come in, hoping that it's going to come in, right? But you've already discussed what might happen if it doesn't, and you've already set that expectation that this is a possibility that couldn't happen, that could work out this way. So, just what are some of the hurdles? We got the appraisal, we got the home inspection, we got the termite inspection, and for each of those, there's a a way to set the expectation for the buyer and a way to set the expectation for the seller, and they're different, right? So think of all the different things, negotiating the contract. What are some of the other hurdles besides those four?
You
Did
have
say lender?
No, yeah, you did lender, but sometimes you have hurdles with the title report if the title is clouded.
Yeah.
You have to explain sometimes that this is an access road. Access roads are not county maintained. You know, there's quite a bit with the title reports.
Yeah,
Yeah, I had a,
HOAs, if you have an HOA, that can be a hurdle.
Easement. Yeah, you have easements also.
yeah, I had a weird child support lien come up on my little cabin when I went to sell it, and I was like, it was in my name and my son's name. All my kids were grown when I divorced. There's no child support on my end, and my son's gay. Like, he doesn't have any kids. There's no child support on his end. So yeah, it was just some weird, I think that his name is common, and it just flagged it. And we had to figure out what the heck was going on with this stupid lien before I closed escrow.
If the property that you're representing or from either side has any significant easements, access to another property,
Hmm.
or a sewer line that runs right through the middle of the lot that doesn't allow you to build over it, or those types of things, I highly recommend you request all the easements to be mapped and get that initialed by the buyer and the seller, because those kind of things can come back to, those kind of things come back and bite you in the long run. Not so much the property line utility easements, those are pretty common, but it's probably a good practice just to ask the title company for map easements on your listings that you're doing.
there's something you could set the expectation with whatever title rep you use. Just say, look, if you want me to use you for title, here's what I expect. Whenever I order a prelim, if there's any maps on it, just send me the maps with it. Don't make me request that. Saves you a bunch of time in the long run going forward. They'll totally do that for you once you have a relationship with a title rep and you're using them and giving them your business.
Well, especially right now when you don't know where the property line ends. It's just all white. I mean,
But I guess with setting expectations, almost anytime somebody tells me a pain point they have, like an agent says, I hate dealing with this part of the transaction, it's because they're not setting the expectation right. And there is some other agent that figured out that part of the transaction, that figured out how to set the expectation to make that go smoothly. So ask around until you find someone that solved your pain point. And that's what this mastermind is about. Is there any place in the transaction where every time I get to hear, whether I'm representing a buyer or a seller, it's painful for me. I hate this part. Does any of you guys have any pain points in your transactions on the buyer side or the seller side where it's like, I dread this? Because if you do, it's because you haven't yet figured out how to set expectations in that area. I guarantee you.
I think me personally is I dread when they use a down the hill inspector who does not understand snow loads and various things of why our decks have a slight slant for snow, you know? It's just difficult because a lot of these home inspectors are not for the mountain area. So I always tell the buyers, you know, please use an inspector that is familiar with the mountain area.
is that goes with appraisals also, Monica?
Yeah, well, when the lender, I always ask them if they do request, when they set it out through their little portal, that if they can ask for a mountain appraiser only, you know, because otherwise we have a problem when an appraiser from Hollywood comes up here to Lake Arrowhead. I had that happen in Big Bear. The appraiser was from Hollywood and I'm like, why are you doing this? Well, I snatched it. Oh, you snatched it. Okay. You know? And so I went back to the lender and said, we're not using it. He's not familiar with the area. He doesn't understand, you know, the different areas and the significance of certain neighborhoods. I said, that's like me trying to go sell down, you know, in Hollywood, you know, same instances. And then they'll say, well, can you send a list? And I'll send like 6 different appraisers that are up in the mountain area.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, or as Will likes to say, is the inspector or the appraiser geographically competent?
That's very nicely put.
Well, and a bigger issue is the insurance issue. I think we have to be really careful on offering advice on that. Everybody's afraid of insurance right now.
I always give a list of insurance agents that are from the mountain area and can understand explaining to buyers and sellers the zones. Because my house might be insured different than a house a block away because of the way the fire will funnel down the mountain. It's called, they're called zones, and that's what the insurance agents are there for.
Right, so we just have to be
Buyer
ready to
shopping
give that advice.
long before, you know, a lot of them wait till the last minute and then they're super surprised by how expensive insurance is in the mountains. So that's something, set the expectation that they're gonna go and shop for. That's gotta be done before their contingency period is up for sure, because there's people that back out because they like had no idea how much insurance was gonna be and it takes the home out of their budget.
Correct. And I always look at I talked to that's how I introduced myself to the lender too. And I said, did you explain the differences on their PITI when it comes to insurance? Because we have the wraparounds up here and it's quite more expensive than other parts of California. And the loan officer is like, well, I use this formula. I said, you can't use this formula because you may have just knocked him out of what he qualified for.
Good point, yeah.
Another expectations too is the
Mhm.
utility, you know, when the buyers don't know, oh, I have to go get them. Yeah, you need to call these. So I sent out a form and says, here's your utilities for Big Bear. I put the stars on the ones that they'll use so they can get ready before. And I said, no, don't wait till the 2 days before. And I said, no, you need to call and get it ready. So they're ready for it.
Yeah, so, and in relation to that, the gas is really important that it gets transferred before the close of escrow, because
Really,
if the gas company shuts off the gas and now to turn it back on, they have to you have to physically be present, somebody has to physically be present in the house when they turn the gas on to make sure there's no leaky appliances or nothing left on in the house. So that creates a real problem if that doesn't get transferred properly and in time.
how many agents have been at the home to turn on the gas because they didn't do that? Or they
Right.
Did that, so. And that's both seller and buyer, you have to, help. both
Yeah.
of them.
Good one.
The seller said, I always forget about the thing on Spectrum boxes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, how many of those have you returned?
Or you send the form to the new buyers, they can fill it out and keep that same system. If they decide to keep Spectrum.
Yeah.
It's a hassle though. It's a hassle.
Just saying,
Like, I
because my
always
client just
forget.
did it because they couldn't get up here to do it.
I am always
like-
forgetting that, and I have to go back to the house after the close of escrow. New buyers in their new house, and I gotta pick up the damn equipment. I just did it like 2 days ago. Yeah.
Good one. Well, thanks you guys for showing up and participating.
Thank
Nice.
you.
No, thank you. Very informative as always.
All right, Destiny, are we gonna end this and start another one? Is that how we've decided it?
Yeah, so the Lake Arrowhead agents, you guys are gonna have to we're gonna kick you out basically, and then just join again, the same link. And we're starting,
Oh, okay.
okay?
We'll see you in a
Otherwise,
minute.
your entire meeting at the end of the mastermind. So I'm signing off now. Bye.
Bye.